Hi, and welcome to Decoding AQ, helping you to learn the tools, mindsets, and actions to thrive in an ever-changing world. Hi, and welcome to the next episode of Decoding AQ. With me today, I'm joined by Brian Kropp, formerly Kroppcycnzski. So I've just learned, so we'll maybe dive into that in a moment. He is the Chief of Research at Gartner's HR practice. And lives in Arlington in Virginia in the US. So welcome, Brian.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Do you know, I just want to start off. I'd love it if you could tell the story that you've just shared with me about Nutella.
Yeah. So
who is Nutella and how did they come about?
It is, I mean, you might actually see her walk by in the background here in just a moment. But we've always had dogs in our family. Growing up, always did. My wife always did. And we had one, and then COVID came, and we thought, well, we should get a second dog. Our first dog was starting to get older, and she's still around, and she might wander by at some point as well. And so I got a second dog. And then my daughter, I've got three kids. My daughter in the middle absolutely loves the dogs, and they mean the world to her. And she decided that she wanted to get a beagle puppy. And literally every day for 3 or 4 months, she would come to my wife and I'd be like, Mommy, Daddy, can we get a beagle puppy? Mommy, Daddy, can we get a beagle puppy? Mommy, Daddy, can we get a beagle puppy? And I had this idea. It's like, well, we've already got 2 dogs. That is plenty. We don't need any more. We're fine. And I tried to give her tasks to dissuade her from getting another dog. So I asked her to make a PowerPoint presentation about why we need another dog. She had to build a business case for why we needed to get another dog. And she just kept doing it. And eventually I was like, fine, I give up. We'll get the other dog. And so I'm not sure if that's good parenting or the fact that I tried to distract her and failed, which is bad parenting. But somehow she stuck to it. She kept working on it. And now we have 3 dogs. They're great. They're a ton of work, like anybody who's got a bunch of animals. But it's wonderful to have the animals in the house. And that's the story of how we got our third dog.
Third dog, Nutella. It's interesting, isn't it, that certain behaviors, certain traits can be admired and get a result. Mm-hmm. And the same trait and the same behaviors can get us not an applause, there's the door, and not the result we want, depending on context. So I'm interested in your career. So you spent some time at a IT consulting business and CEB for, was it maybe 15 years?
Give or take,
before it was bought out by Gartner. Was there any occasions in there, Brian, that maybe your daughter or by osmosis has seen you never give up, always keep asking for things and have that kind of tenacity and grit to get what you want? Is that something that you've had in your career?
Yeah, it is. It's one of those things where you're absolutely right. The same behavior is sometimes viewed very positively and sometimes differently. Even within the same company or same organization or around the same problem, depending upon not just the context of the situation, but the other people you're interacting with and engaging with. So there's, in addition to my own experience, I'm lucky enough to talk with hundreds, if not thousands, of HR leaders every year about the experiences that they have with their own workforces, their own organizations, and how that plays out. And, like a simple example is sometimes, depending upon the organization and the context, the idea of constantly asking questions can be highly valuable as you're trying to work through a problem. At the same time, constantly asking questions can be viewed as overanalyzing and not actually getting to a decision. So there's certain places where the exact same behavior is viewed positively or negatively, either because of the context, the situation, the other people involved, the urgency that you're facing. And there's another part of that, which is the same behavior done in a slightly different way can then also be switched from being seen positively to negatively. And negatively, again, like getting the questions part of it, that persistence of asking questions might seem annoying if it's the same question, but if you frame the question slightly differently each time, then it's viewed as evolution. And All of those sorts of things matter and play out. And from my daughter's perspective, sometimes persistence just wears you down, and you give in, and you go from, okay, I appreciate it. Okay, it's getting annoying. I give in. Oh, it's gone away now. So it actually works out too.
I guess, these questions that we can have that come up, what are they trying to answer? Are they trying to just validate a known? Are they trying to show someone up? Are they trying to get a bit of data to make a decision? Is it, for example, you mentioned COVID and the challenge we've had about hybrid work, a question of, or a persistence of, we need you to come back. We need you to come back. Why aren't you coming back? We need you to come back. Here's business case. Here's PowerPoint study. Need you to come back. And on the flip side, someone will be going, I need to stay at home. I want to stay remote. I want hybrid, or I want a balance.
Yeah.
So I guess it's not only the questions, it's what are we trying to solve? What are some of the challenges there that we need to kind of understand in there? And what I'd be fascinated in all of the conversations you have over, hundreds and thousands of people of HR, what are some of the things that maybe are frustrating them, and maybe they're feeling worn down by them? What is exciting them of the types of questions that they're getting?
Yeah, this whole question of return to workplace is so fascinating to me. And if you roll the clock back, the huge fear that almost every executive had back in kind of March, April 2020 is that, oh, all these people are going to work from home, and they're going to sit at home, eat pizza all day, take naps, watch TV, and not get anything done. And that was a huge fear, maybe legitimate at the time, maybe not, but it was the real fear that people had. And what we've learned across the last 2 years is that people can be highly productive working in different places. And interestingly, not just working in different places, but also working at different times, working in different amounts, working for different objectives. But there's many ways we can do things to actually accomplish goals. And when you look at it from an employee perspective, there's all this conversation about return to workplace, largely from kind of senior leaders at companies. And those same employers are saying, well, you've trusted me for the last 2 years and we've gotten a lot done. So what was so magical and special about this building that I had to drive to or commute to that took forever, cost me a lot of money to get there, caught me stuck in a place that I didn't want to be? And by the way, when I go there, half the people aren't going to be there anyway. So I'm just going to be doing video calls from there. We talked to all these companies like, well, we don't have a safe workplace environment. So we want you in the building, but we want you to do video calls from the building to other people in the building. And you're like, well, that makes zero sense. But I think one of the things that's really frustrating for employees is what we haven't done a good job of for most organizations is, why should I go back and work from the workplace? Why can't I just keep working from home? And without being able to answer that why it's better to be here, and when is it better to be here, under what situations is it better to be here, what are the unique things that we can do here that we can't do elsewhere, failing to answer that question just creates a ton of frustration for employees. On the other hand, you've got senior leaders who have grown up in an environment, who know how to lead when they actually see people and they can get them together. It's really frustrating for them because they're being asked to do things in a fundamentally different way, in a more human way, in a more emotional way, in a more social way, rather than a more rational, task-driven way that they've done so in the past. So we're asking them to change when a lot of them are saying, well, I've been successful doing it this way for 20, 25, 30 years. Why should I change when I've got a proven track record of what works? And so there's frustration on that part of it, because their perspective is, it wasn't broken before. Why are we trying to change it? Can't we just go back to where we were before? And we're not going to go back. The labor market is indicating that we're not going back. Technology is giving us the opportunity to not go back in the ways we were before. But that's where that frustration occurs. And without really appreciating the shoes that other people are in and the perspective that they've got, and continuing to bang our head against, this is what I believe, without saying, well, what do they believe, just exacerbates the frustration around this entire return to workplace question.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? That in any friction where we have healthy debate of opposing thoughts, is the aim to bring the opposer to believe and, go in alignment with me? Or can it exist in this parallel paradox? And the requirement of all of those things takes effort, takes work to see both sides, to either convince and flow, or to rewrite the playbook, to go into a place where, okay, the playbook worked before, this is how it's successful, rather than try and get back to there or adopt here, is, okay, here's an opportunity to rewrite a playbook, to reinvent, but we need maybe the hows, and we need some of the support, and we need some of the space that wasn't just, oh, I'm in cope mode, it will get back to where it is in a bit, so I don't really need to do much to now go, it's not, I need to rethink some of those things. So where have you seen that working really well? Because, there's been organizations that have been hybrid for years prior to COVID, and there's some that are doing it very well. What are some of the key traits, some of the key activities? And I know empathy is a big thing that you talk about before as being a key trait for managers moving forwards. So how does that play out, and where is it practically working well that we can learn from, Brian?
I think to answer that question, we actually need to take a step back and really pull apart why it's not working well. And if you think about a workplace, a company 20, 25, 30 years ago, there were actually a lot of rules and structure around it. There were rules like, we don't talk about politics in the workplace. We don't talk about our personal lives in the workplace. And while on one hand, it is wonderful that we're trying to create a more inclusive environment, that we're encouraging people to bring their whole self to work. And all of the research clearly shows that when we've got that, we've got a more creative environment, we've got a more productive environment, and those things are good. However, that actually makes it more difficult in some ways to find common agreement when we've got such like kind of this full picture that's being brought into the workplace. In particular, in a world where outside of work is becoming really, really fragmented. When you look at all the different types of media that people consume, social media, cable news, whatever it might be, people are being pushed into different silos where the information that they consume is much narrower, less broad, and that's true of almost everyone. You see that sort of outside fragmentation then playing out inside the workplace. And here's some really scary data for you. More than half of employees have actively avoided another employee because they disagree with their politics, for an employee that they have to work with, right? So what that's telling you, 1 out of 2 employees is saying, to get my job done, I need to go and talk to Ross, but because I disagree with him about who he voted for in the last election, I'm not going to talk to him. How do you get people together to find common agreement when there's more variability, and you understand more about someone in a world that's even more fragmented than we've seen before? And I think that's the key thing that we have to understand, is we're not going to go back to where we were before. The world has changed too much. The world is more fragmented, more separated. Hybrid work causes more separation. And here's another really interesting thing we've learned, is that in a hybrid world, your connections become much stronger with the people you work with to get your work done, but relative to an in-person world becomes much weaker with all of the other people of the organization. So you don't have repetition, you don't have experience with them, like all those sorts of things that makes it hard. So what we have to do as leaders, and what organizations that are making hybrid work the best, there's a couple of things that they've done around it. One, they have identified and made good arguments, thoughtful arguments as to when does it actually make sense to be together. When should we be spending our time together? When should we be in the same place at the same time? And they make that clear to employees. And in order to make it clear when you should be together, they're also really clear about when it's okay to be apart. These sorts of jobs, these sorts of tasks, this type of work can be done independently, can be done asynchronously. But in order to define when we need to be together, you need to define when it's okay to be apart. That's one of the first most important things. And most companies just focus on when we have to be together and ignore when is it okay to be apart and when is it okay to be flexible. Second, they identify the things that bring us together. What are the shared things that matter to everyone? And they really focus on those shared objectives. And those shared objectives might be, they weren't what they were before, which was to make money. That is important, and don't get me wrong, absolutely critical, and organizations need to do that. but that as the shared purpose is no longer motivating to get over this issue of fragmentation. So we have to identify the things that we are doing to make the world better, to impact the lives of our customers. There's one company that we work with, they're in the healthcare industry, and what they've realized is you can't have senior leaders talk about the importance of the business. You have to have patients that benefited from the experience talk about it. There's another group that we work with that is a nonprofit that raises revenue to help support different groups. And what they realized is you can't talk about how you're going to have a better career by doing this sort of work. You actually have to bring in the people that are impacted by the money that you raised to create that shared purpose. But you have to find that thing that gets over the fragmentation that's there around the political, cultural, social beliefs that are there. So that's the second thing that they've done. They've identified what that shared purpose looks like. And then the third thing that they've done is they explain a lot more. They spend a lot more time explaining the decisions that they're making, and importantly, how those decisions align with their values. Because there's so much that's going on in terms of companies having to decide, should we be in the workplace or not? Should we support the social issue or not? Should we move our location this way or not? Should we pay employees that work in a lower cost of living location less or not? It seems like an infinite number of decisions that are occurring. And what a lot of companies are doing is just saying the decision, but not explaining why they got to the decision. With all of these decisions that are going on now, there's winners and losers. Some people benefit more greatly from it than others, from their career, from their personal beliefs, whatever it might be. But what the best organizations are doing right now is explaining how they got to a decision, why they got to it, and like I said, why that decision aligns with their values. Because if you can do that, then even people who disagree with the decision at least understand why it was made. And so those are the three things that we're really seeing is they're defining when you don't have to be together. They're creating that shared purpose to get everyone together, and they're explaining their decisions through the lens of their values. And if you do that, it's not going to be perfect every time, but you're going to be a lot more likely to be better off than worse off at the end of the day.
As I was listening there, Brian, I kept having this repeating thing going in the back of my mind of how much this is linked to parenting. Maybe it was just because of the priming seed that we had with your daughter, is the fact that we need to know the boundaries. What are the rules of the game? When is it right to behave this way? When is it right to behave this way? So yeah, we get that. Next piece, well, get us close to the impact, so what's the purpose? What's the piece? Well, actually let us visibly see the result of the effort of how it's making people smile, how it's making their lives better. So we can bring that in. That's a good piece of what we do. And then the final one, it's a bit like in school, you got a mark for the result, but you also got marks for your workings out. So you showed your workings out. And that's what we're desiring a lot in technology as well as AI. It's this black box. No, we want to know the workings out of how it came to that decision so that we can further understand. So I think those three principles are just brutally magical for facing many challenges. Insert whichever it is, hybrid, wherever there's a place in which there's change, know the rules, get those rules and what we're doing close to what the impact is, and explain the workings out.
Yeah, and creating rules, if you don't explain why you've got the rule, kind of tying that first one and second one together, all that does is create silliness. So getting back to the hybrid part, why is it important that so you've given me a rule that I have to come to the office 3 days a week. Why does that make things better? How does that help us come up with better ideas? How does that help us support customers better? Why do I need to do that? And so many companies are just falling down on that part of it, around the communication around it, the explanation around it. And you might be able to get away with it in a really bad labor market. But as of right now, this is the tightest labor market that we've seen in a generation. And there's enough other companies that are making decisions to go in different directions that if you're not explaining why you're doing it, if you're not providing that connection to the impact that's there, folks are going to be able to find another job elsewhere. And this is US data, but there are 0.6 people looking for a job for every job that's posted right now. I mean, literally, there's more jobs open than people looking for jobs. And if that's the environment that we're in, and economically, it seems like we'll be that way for a while, you have to adjust and you have to meet employees where they are, rather than assuming that we're still in the worst labor market ever, and the employers are totally in charge. And if that's how you're thinking, you're going to be losing as an employer in this labor market.
And I think a lot of the things that will unfold is through choice and through freedom, that all things are possible. We can get that result from different locations. We can get that result through different methods, but we'll be in a way in which, well, what does work actually mean now? Is part of work going to hang out, to be connected? Is part of work now more learning and experimenting than it was just performing? I know in February, Brian, as us at AQai as a remote team, we did a workation where we all went to Portugal. People we've worked with for over a year we'd never met in person, and we hung out for a week. And we did all sorts of things, from optional yoga bits in the morning, eating meals together, a bit like coming back to parents. You have your meals together, and that's where you get connection, you get stories, you create things that you didn't think by design because it was on the meeting agenda. You're just connecting with people, and you have, what your values are, what your boundaries are, and creativity happens. So I think what's going to be interesting for people is we can do our work in many ways, through many methods, and we'll find these new playbooks. But I think the opportunity for organizations is this permission to reimagine it.
I think what you're getting to is super important. And, you're talking about this a little bit earlier around, we had a playbook for how we got things done before. And that playbook was, we all come into the same building from 8:30 to 5:30 every day. Serendipity happens. We've got a lot of structure. We do meetings from this time. We bump into people we had a playbook for what that looked like. And one of the things that kind of one of the mental models I think is really important here, what a lot of executives have tried to do is, well, let's take that old playbook and adjust it and tweak it for a remote, hybrid, virtual environment, whatever you want to call it. But they still started with that same beginning point and edited it. What I believe is we actually have to throw that one away and start over. Because what so many companies have been trying to do with their hybrid strategy is like, well, we know what in-person looks like. We did remote for a while. Let's just mush them together, and that's gonna be our strategy. And kind of the best example I've got for that is like, I like spaghetti, I like tacos. Spaghetti tacos seems like a really bad idea, but that's what companies have been doing, and that's where this idea of writing a brand new playbook, I think, becomes really important. And a playbook that's not defined by place, but a playbook that's defined by connection, and defined by relationship, and defined by humanity. And so you look at a variety of different things. Like in the past, the way that we created our culture was what our office looked like. Now that culture is going to be created by how we do work and what those relationships look like. In the past, we made decisions from a rational perspective exclusively. Now we have to make decisions from a social and emotional perspective. And we have to have a new playbook for what that looks like. And so where the companies that I think are going to be the most successful going forward are the ones that don't try to edit their past, but try to write a new future. And that's how you have to be thinking about this. And we don't have to pretend we're babes in the woods, just birthed for the first time, and we have no knowledge of anything. We have a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience, but we don't want to be bound to that. We don't want to. And if you're finding yourself in situations like, well, this is how we used to do it, so how do we change what we used to do? That's a very different question for what should we do going forward, and having that eyes wide open approach. But that new playbook is not an edited playbook. It's a brand new playbook that companies need to create to be successful in the new environment.
It's interesting, isn't it? We study history to be freed from it, not to be bound by it. And that opportunity to, we study a couple of interesting parts that link into this of someone's ability to unlearn and their level of mental flexibility. How do they play with each other? Yeah. Level of resilience, how much can we just deal with that change over time and allow to, with unlearning, reassess new data. What's changed? Do I apply that information now on this new field, this new place? And it's interesting, the links that are not only at an organization level, but at an individual level. When we come then down to, my playbook or my baggage, i.e. my identity linked to the role I had, the title I had, the task I had, to now equally give ourselves permission to go back to a child and world the oyster, what could I be? Rethink and enter the world tomorrow. Just because I've been this before, I can use that information. I don't need to throw it away, but I can start fresh. And I want to link this to the story of how did you become Brian Kropp from Kroppcycnzski, was it originally? Just share that story, because I think this is interesting about at what point do changes in our lives affect us and our names, our identities, and our past. What is left behind and what do we take forward? So I'd love if you can share a little bit of that, Brian.
Yeah, sure. So my grandfather, many moons ago, immigrated to the US from Poland. And they were Kroppcycnzskis from there. And it is like, at one point in that last name, there's like 9 consonants in a row. So it's like super Polish last name from that perspective. And it's one of those things, like when I try to remember how to spell it, I have to be like, okay, P-P-C-Y. And if you count Y's as consonants, by the way, I'm doing it that way. It's like P-P-C-Y-C-N-Z-S-K, then an I at the end, like ridiculously long. But as he emigrated to the US, at Ellis Island, they're like, nope, it is now just Kropp, because 5 letters is a whole lot easier than like 13 or whatever it was at that point. And so the entire time he was in the US, he actually never learned English, and grew up in a Polish community in Pittsburgh. And then, my dad, from there, ended up actually working for the US government for most of his career. And that's kind of the family history part of it, and it's a little bit funny as well. I grew up, I went to grad school, I got a PhD in economics, and was convinced I would do something in economics and finance more directly. And I was working at the World Bank from that perspective, a wonderfully important organization. And there was this small company called Corporate Executive Board at the time. And the thing I was really struck by was, and I knew a couple people were working there, they're like, well, there's just a lot of smart people around. And you like grad school, you like debating these smart ideas, you should come and talk to them. And so I did. And the business model, to dramatically oversimplify it, is like, well, you learn really smart things from one company and then tell another company about those really smart things. And like, yeah. And like, so you put Coke and Pepsi in the same room, and Coke and Pepsi talk to each other about what they're doing. It's like, yeah, it's kind of the idea. And I remember thinking to myself, well, there's at least a lot of smart people. I don't think this business is going to work, but at least I'll be around a lot of smart people for a while. And that seems like a good decision. By the way, the business does work, as a side note. But I was highly skeptical at the beginning. And then I was even more skeptical when I was hired by the company and they said, well, because I thought it was going to be like our finance practice or our strategy practice or something like that. And they're like, well, we want you to go to our HR practice. And I thought to myself, well, that is the place where people go to die. Why in the world would I want to do that? And again, I thought to myself, well, I'll do that for a year or two, and then go to a cooler, what I thought at the time was a cooler place. But I was lucky enough to have a chance to talk to a variety of different CEOs, other senior leaders at really large companies. And one of the things I realized that I was completely naive to was the job of a CEO is talent. 60-70% of what they work on is, how do I find the right people that should be leading my organization? How do I motivate the people in my organization? What type of people do I need and want in my organization? And once I realized that, in addition to the fact that talent and people is this amazing combination of analytics and art, and putting all of that together to try to understand what's going on with an organization, how to motivate people, how to engage them, how to encourage them, how to support them, how to grow them, how to develop them. It's just amazingly fascinating. And the me of 15 years ago or so, when I first started working the space, I never would have believed that was the case when I look back. But I think when it comes down to it, in a lot of ways, you have to be willing to try different things and think not just about what is the title, what is the role, but what is the people that you're going to be on that journey with. And if you can find the right people to be on the journey with, the business might fail, it might not work, but at least it's going to be a lot of learning that occurs along that journey. And that's like the best advice that I can give to people nowadays is just be with smart people, even if it's not what you want to work on. Being around smart people is so much more enjoyable than working on something that you like, but you're around other people where you're like, hey, what's going on there? Sorts of things.
How would you define smart people, Ryan?
Yeah, willing to ask questions, and one, and then two, willing to admit that they were wrong in terms of how they were thinking about it. I think smart is not defined by like school or IQ, or at least in my mind, or any of those sorts of things. I think it's defined more by creativity and curiosity. And by smart, I'm really talking about people that wonder about things. People that ask the question like, well, why is it that way? Why can't it be a different way? And then people who say, it's like, well, I think it might be this way, but then I've looked at it and thought about it, and I'm actually wrong on some part of that. And that willingness to evolve the thinking, evolve the curiosity, evolve the answer, to just to question and to wonder. And that, I think, is the most important definition of smart. It's not, can you memorize something? AI can take care of that for you. It's not, can you do a repeated task well? AI is eventually going to take care of all of that. It's just a matter of time, right? And probably make better decisions at the end of the day on average. But it's, do you have the ability to wonder, and that curiosity, and that ability to question, including questioning what you thought was right before?
And when, if there is, when is there too many questions, and what are bad questions? Because I guess this, like many things, they can exist in a paradox, right? We can have questions that are great because it's coming from curiosity, it's coming from wonder. And then we can have these other questions that are coming from, you didn't listen the first time, you're asking the same thing, but in 3 different questions because you don't like the answer or you didn't hear the answer. And that can create a lot of friction, right? Because I've had hundreds of people that have worked for me over the years, and some asked loads of questions and I never got frustrated. And other times people ask me questions and I get really frustrated, man. And I find myself, trying to, eat my own medicine, breathe. You're not going to react, you're going to respond, you're going to reflect, you're going to go through this process so that you can get your, body back into cohesion. You're not going to get the amygdala hijack. You're going to, okay, yeah, they've asked this question before. Maybe I didn't, maybe I haven't explained it right. So there are different types of questions, right? It's one of the beauties, the 5 whys. Great, let's get to the root cause. But how do you deal with it when it's maybe something that frustrates you with whatever perspective you have, that maybe they should know the answer, they've asked it too many times, or they didn't like the answer? How do you deal with that stuff? Because I want to know, Brian.
Yeah, no, I do too. There's definitely a parenting component to that as well, which is like, why didn't you make your bed again this morning? Right? And it's like, we've had this conversation every morning for the last several months. Like, why did you? And it's like, literally a conversation I had this morning. In that situation, as I was driving my oldest son to school today, what I realized, and I brought it up again, what he said is like, well, I don't think it's important. Like, why is making your bed in the morning an important thing to do? And my son thought it was just like because I was telling him to do it. And part of the reason why I think it's important is like creating that structure around like preparation and making that transition to start things It's just one of the steps in that process. So it's not that there's anything uniquely important about making your bed, except like maybe it's nicer when you go to sleep at night. It's like, well, why can't I do it in the afternoon? But it's part of like that routine to get going, and one of the steps in that process. And like that's my viewpoint. It's not necessarily right or wrong, but the bigger thing to learn from is if you're asking the same question or engaging the same thing, I tend to believe it's not because the other person is mean or wrong or something else about them. It's that they have a different viewpoint about the importance of that thing. And if I think it's important, but someone else doesn't, or vice versa, then you're just going to get to the same questioning over and over again and repetition of it. So I think so much of the why are we having the same conversation again and again is one person thinks it's more important than the other person, or thinks different aspects of it are important compared to the other person. So I think that's one part of it. And I think that's one explanation. And so getting to, do we think it's important or not? And if no, then why do we think do we have different perceptions of importance? I think that's one thing. I think that the other place where this tends to play out a lot is where the questioning might get frustrating is lack of progression within the questioning. So the answer, or not even answer, but the conversation around the question that happens should push us to another question, should build on that, should further the conversation. And when the series of questions is not creating progress, that's, I think, where it also becomes frustrating. And what's important here that I've come to realize, it's not progress towards the definitive answer, but progress in any direction is helpful. Because sometimes you have to progress around a series of questions to get back to where you started, but that's still progress, even though it seems really circular. But it is questions and conversation without progress that I think becomes particularly frustrating. So that's where, just as I've learned in the research that we've done, the executives that I've talked with, is why is it not progressing, and understanding that part. So I think there's those two things, right? Which is, do we think different things are important, or why is it not progressing?
Because asking great questions is a real skill. And a lot of questions are actually statements masquerading as questions, or a recommendation, generally with a wagging finger.
Yeah.
And, going around in circles, it's a bit like, well, yes, Karen, that was the first thing we looked at in the shop, and we've just gone to 10 other shops to come back to the same thing. But I understand why we needed to go to all of those other things to go and discover and just realize that it was the right thing. So all of those other things were valuable. It's not that was the waste of time. No, it further gave us the research we needed to have that first answer.
Yeah.
And I guess business is in this situation where not even that first answer, we haven't got any stability around it, because everything's shifting. So we have to go off and be in this mode of exploration, be in this mode of constant discovery, which can be exhausting, which can take lots of energy, which can result in things that are unexpected results or non-desirable results from some perspective. But if it's progress, if it's learning, if it's gaining something in some direction, that should be celebrated.
Yeah.
And we should have the structure around that to allow that to take place. And I think just lastly, I think one of the hardest things is when there's pressure. So if there's some sort of pressure of time or expectation or something for that to happen, then it's a higher melting pot for that friction, where we need to call on our empathy, call on our abilities as leaders to be able to take space for that.
And I think that's absolutely right. I think there's one other thing that's really important to layer on here as well, is the frequency with which we engage in those conversations now is actually a greater ratio of the time that we spend. So if you think back, 10, 15 years ago, when there was less automation, when there was more predictability, and I'll make this part of it up. I know the direction, I don't know the magnitude, but back then it was probably 70% of the stuff we worked on. We knew what to do. We had done it before. Maybe it was a little bit different this time, but it was much more repeated. But with automation, a lot of those repeated things have gone away, and more will go away in the future. With the increase in the level of uncertainty and volatility that we've had, we're encountering more things for the first time that we've never encountered before. I mean, 2 years ago, who would have thought they'd had to manage through a global epidemic, massive social justice movements, moving everyone out of the workplace, creating this hybrid work environment, responding to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all of the implications that are associated with that. I don't know what the next 2 years are going to bring, but I know they're going to be brand new problems that we've never struggled with before. So now if that ratio in the past was 70-30, predictable versus uncertain, it's moving to 30-70, 30% predictable, 70% uncertain. And so what also makes it harder is not just the speed, but the volume. And so you layer both of those on top of each other. We have to get to an immediate answer on a really difficult, uncertain question that we've never tackled before all the time. Boy, that's exhausting.
Yeah.
And it's those characteristics together that I think.
I wrote about, the shift, what you talked about there, where we're in repeat, that's where management is, management structure, process, utilization, performance is around productivity, efficiency, and it's low caliber cognitive activities, right? So we can do lots of that, and a management structure works well. When we're now in the, from a management economy and a knowledge economy into an imagination one, we need to have a different, not just coming back to the word playbook, but we need to have different resources. We need a higher level of the fats and sugar, of the energies that come in of the requirement, because it is exhausting, because we are curious, we're doing things for the first time, and it's both exciting and unsettling. It's both, at the fringe and at the complete celebration. And so therefore, holding space for this kind of, how do we stay well? How do we, have a healthiness in this turmoil of chaos that is often depleting as much as it is exciting, that we come home. I know that, over the last few years, it's not just that I love my work. I love what I'm doing. I'm so inspired, engaged by it, but it's exhausting. And I don't see that as a negative, but I do need to hold space for me and my team to rejuvenate, to be able to be well. And so perhaps just in a final few areas for us, Brian, is this, wellness becoming a metric where companies are not only just understanding their employees, but building a sustainable new version that is required for wellness, because we need to be far healthier than we've ever been before, because we could be unhealthy and still be productive. We can't be unhealthy now and be productive in that environment. And so if you believe in the same thing, and maybe a quick riff on that, followed with what are maybe some practical tips we could do to help either understand that wellness or leverage that opportunity of wellness.
The need for this, I couldn't agree with more. And the mental model that so many companies and managers and leaders had about their organization, their workforce, and themselves in a lot of cases was, great is defined by maximizing efficiency. And what we've learned is efficiency is great, but efficiency also creates a lot of fragility. And the mental model that I've got is, imagine a balloon, and that balloon is fully inflated with air. You've got as much air as you possibly can have in that balloon, and it is you've maximized the efficiency of that balloon. But boy, just the smallest pinprick, that balloon is going to pop. What we have to think about is our organization, our workforce, our personal lives. It's a balloon that's like, 85% full of air. It might not be efficiently maximized, but when you squeeze one part of that balloon, the air just moves to another place, but it doesn't pop. And that place where it moves to gets stretched and is put under a lot of pressure, but it doesn't pop. And that's the mental model that I think we need to really be thinking about here, is how do we work and operate as a 85-90% inflated balloon that can be squeezed and stretched and stressed, but can be relaxed as well, rather than operating the most efficiently maximized but incredibly fragile balloon.
Can I just make a quick piece on that, Brian? So we have two adaptability behaviors that show up on our platform in terms of utilize and improve and explore and transform. And we need this beautiful harmony between those two things. But if too much in one area is like the full balloon. And having, yes, utilize and improve is all about efficiency, all of those things, good. But you need that space to go and expand and, oh, the balloon moves over here. What's over here now? What's going on here? I really like that. And that connected a few dots for me. So how do we do that in practice? What are a few tips where we could maybe let a little bit of the air out to deflate, to allow ourselves to go in these areas of exploration, in these areas of curiosity, of discovering different ways?
Yeah, I like the language you're using around kind of an imagination economy as well. And I think one of the steps to making that happen is that you need to design for 90%. You need to design your calendar, your day, your workloads, your staffing to 90%, not 100. Because what we realize, even like supply chains, for example, when we're designing for just-in-time inventory, it works incredibly well when everything else is working incredibly well. But what we've learned in the last 2 years is that other stuff's not going to work incredibly well, and it's going to break and have problems. We don't know where it is or what it is or when it's going to happen, but we have to design for 90%, I think is first. I think second, we have to design for output, not input. To the balloon analogy, we design for how much air can we get into the balloon, not does the balloon actually stay a balloon. And that's where we think, inputs versus outputs, much more focus on outputs, what's getting done, not how it's getting done. And having that flexibility and that freedom to focus on, did it get done? Not necessarily did it get done in the way I wanted? Did they just do a lot of stuff but didn't get it done? But that outputs versus inputs weighting and philosophy, I think, is shifting a lot. And then I think just one last thought that we've really learned about this question of wellness. We've explored across the last couple of years all sorts of new ways to improve the wellness of our employees, mental health support, financial health support, paying back student loans. All of those things are great and wonderful. And we should keep doing them, and we need to keep doing them in a more human-based world that we're living in. But one of the other things that we've really started to learn across the last couple of years is my wellness is not just about me, it's about my family and my community. And I think that next stage is going to be, how do we not just improve the wellness of our employees, but how do we think about the wellness of our families and our communities? So for example, if your spouse loses their job, if your partner loses their job, that puts incredible stress on someone. And what are we doing to support that person's spouse? And there's lots of things we could do. Like, one of the most wonderful things that I saw a company do during the pandemic is that they opened up their learning and development platform, their e-learning modules, all that sort of stuff, very scalable, to the loved ones of their employees. So if their loved one lost a job, you could take their IT certification programs, if that made sense for you, for free through your spouse's job. So what are we doing to help the families of our employees, not just the employee? And I think that's going to be the next evolution of wellness. And there's great, scalable, wonderful opportunities to do that if we have the imagination to come up with them.
To do that. I absolutely love that, Brian. A couple of highlights for me: design for 90% and open up. One of my favorite films was called Pay It Forward. And that whole concept of that I'm well when the people around me are well. How can I pass something? Opening up L&D to spouses. It's made me ignite my own mind and thought about our own business, of what decisions can we make, not only to design for 90% for X, for the unknown, for the not yet defined, for the whatever it would be. Don't give the other 10% something, because that's just redefined. It's still 100%, but I'm just going to label 10% called, you have to do this. Free time, you have to do this. No, just X, whatever shows up. And then that piece of,
And by the way, if nothing shows up, it's okay to not do anything with that time.
Yeah. Time wasted is not wasted time. I got two final pieces. One piece in my head was, when you were talking about outputs and outcomes, if your son, the outcome you're looking for is to have readiness and prepared for the day, and your current, in your mind, is the bed making, what's his version of being prepared and ready for the day if the outcome was that it didn't necessarily need to be a bed made, is kind of the same thing we might need to do in our work, that we've got this, when I'm asked enough about it, well, what is it? It's to be ready, it's to do these things, maybe there's other ways. And it's the things that we hold closest to ourselves, of maybe values or principles that have been passed by our parents or passed by our community, of what's no, that's proper behavior. You do these things. And no, you have to write proper with your grammar. You can't use, text talk. What do you mean? We have this evolution of letting go. So you mentioned something in our conversation that is linked to the final question I ask all of my guests, Brian, and it is, when was the last time you did something for the first time, and what was it?
The last time I did something for the first time. That's a good question. I'm going to give you two thoughts. One thought is something I'm about to do that I'm actually really excited about. And then I'll answer your question. The thing I'm excited to do is I'm about to turn 50. And so my family and I are going to Costa Rica to celebrate that in a couple of months. And so I've wanted to go there forever. So that, like, I've gone on vacation plenty of times before and that sort of stuff, but I'm just really looking forward to that experience. I've always wanted to go, and sort of that. But the kind of in a more, I don't know, perhaps maybe pedantic or simple way, I think what I've been doing much more differently intentionally, and really started doing it for the first time just a couple of months ago, was running meetings and not speaking in them. And what has taken me a long time to realize is that one of the things that I've struggled with is, in a conversation, in a meeting, not listening to what someone else is saying, but thinking about what am I going to say in response. And so what I did for the first time a couple of months ago was to say, look, I'm just not going to respond in the meeting. I'm going to spend the time intentionally listening and freeing myself of the burden of I have to say something or answer a question. And it's not like I was a mute, right? But it was like, but not me being the person that's intentionally pushing it forward, but me being the person that's just going to listen and absorb and reflect and then push forward later. But being intentional for the first time about not responding. And I think I've learned a lot more by freeing myself of the burden of trying to say, well, how am I going to answer that question in the moment? And just be like, I need to think about it. I'm going to answer it later.
I love that, Brian. Still responding, but on a different time scale.
But changing the time.
Not instant. Changing the time frame. That's doing something for the first time. Is something that maybe is habitual, is just a little tweak. What's that little tweak that actually gives room for creativity to happen, for imagination to happen, for yourself, for others? Beautiful. If people want to get in touch and really dig into some of the work at Gartner, that you're doing some amazing things of really bringing the data, the analysis, the voice of what's happening, so that we can hopefully make better decisions, be informed, feel not alone, what all of these things are that we do. How do people get in touch with you, Brian? And
so feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter, or if you go to smarterwithgartner.com, we post a lot of stuff outside of our firewall in terms of the research that we're doing, the webinars that we've got that's there. So just smarterwithgartner.com. It's a great place to go.
Fantastic. Brian, it's been an absolute joy and an education to have our conversation together. I've got a number of notes. I'm going to look forward to re-listening to this one and applying some of the wisdom. So really appreciate your time. And thanks very much, Brian.
Great. Thanks for having me. Talk with you soon.
Do you have the level of adaptability to survive and thrive the rapid changes ahead? Has your resilience got more comeback than a yo-yo? Do you have the ability to unlearn in order to reskill, upskill and break through? Find out today and uncover your adaptability profile and score, your AQ. Visit AQai.io to gain your personalised report across 15 scientifically validated dimensions of adaptability. For a limited time, enter code PODCAST65 for a complimentary AQME assessment. AQai, transforming the way people, teams and organisations navigate change. Thank you for listening to this episode of Decoding AQ. Please make sure you subscribe on your favourite podcast directory, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Please do leave a review and be sure to tune in next time for more insights from our amazing guests.